The house was old, not in a charming or historic way, but in the quiet, unacknowledged manner of spaces that had long stopped adapting to the world around them. It stood at the edge of a thinning forest, its back turned to the road, its porch facing nothing but a long field that dissolved into mist more often than it didn't. When Matthew first arrived, dragging 2 duffel bags and a box of records he would never unpack, the place had smelled like paper left in the rain, a mix of dust and forgotten corners. But it was his, for now. And he needed the silence. Or thought he did. The first few nights were uneventful. The kind of uneventful that made time lose its shape. Days passed without punctuation, and Matthew moved through them like someone rehearsing a role they had never agreed to play. He cleaned what he could, avoided the rooms that creaked for no reason, and let the house's stillness press against his thoughts until even those began to retreat. He would fall asleep in the early hours, sprawled across a sunken couch or beneath a window that never quite latched, the same way a leaf might settle on water, without resistance, without purpose. It wasn't until the 6th morning that something broke the rhythm. Not a sound. Not a light. Just a difference. He awoke, as usual, to the gray blur of daylight filtering through the thin curtains. But the room was off. The wallpaper, which he distinctly remembered as a pale floral pattern, was now striped in faint blue and cream, the lines too crisp, too clean. The ceiling fan had changed, too, where once there had been 3 wooden blades, now there were 5, spinning so slowly they didn't seem to move at all. And the window, which he'd grown used to jamming with his shoulder each night, now slid open with the ease of something recently installed. He stood motionless, barefoot on the wooden floor, trying to trace the boundaries of what felt familiar and what felt substituted. The couch was the same sag in the middle, same torn seam at the arm, but the rug beneath it had disappeared. Or maybe it had never been there? The confusion arrived not like a sharp interruption, but as a soft, creeping uncertainty, the kind that made memory feel like a suggestion rather than a fact. He didn't leave the house that day. He walked through it instead, room by room, fingers trailing the surfaces, noting the placement of every object. The kitchen tiles were glossy where they had once been matte. The light switch near the pantry had moved 3 inches to the right. One of the chairs, the one he always avoided sitting on because of its wobble, now stood firmly, confidently, as if it had never known instability. He opened every drawer, every cabinet, expecting to find more shifts, but most of the contents were untouched. Only the bones of the house had changed. That night, he went to bed deliberately. Clothes folded. Lights off. Curtains closed. He took photographs on his phone of the hallway, the corners, the windows. Proof. Just in case. The next morning, the photos were gone. Not deleted, but never taken. The gallery showed nothing after the 4th day, no timestamps, no thumbnails. And the room, once again, was wrong. The bed had moved 2 feet closer to the wall. The dresser was shorter. The mirror on the opposite side now hung vertically, not horizontal, reflecting the space in a narrow, distorted slice. Outside, the mist was thicker, reaching all the way to the porch now, swallowing the last line of trees. He tried to tell himself it was stress. Sleep deprivation. A trick of memory. But the changes were too consistent, too deliberate. The house wasn't decaying. It was rewriting itself. Quietly. Precisely. He began marking the walls in pencil, small lines behind furniture, symbols in corners, measurements on doorframes. Each morning, new discrepancies. Lines shifted. Symbols smudged. Some vanished entirely. In the upstairs hallway, a door that had always stuck now opened without sound, revealing not the usual storage room, but a narrow closet with no back wall. Only a rectangle of soft darkness that didn't respond to light. He didn't enter. By the 9th morning, the floorboards no longer creaked. Not one. The silence became oppressive, not through noise, but through its absence. It felt less like quiet and more like something had been removed. Sound itself, perhaps. The windows still showed trees, but the patterns of the branches had changed. Subtly, the trees were taller, or maybe the angle was different. Once, he thought he saw someone in the fog, not walking, not moving, just standing. But by the time he turned back from the window, the mist had folded inward and erased the shape. The most disturbing change was in the mirror. He stood before it one evening, brushing his teeth with the dull consistency of someone going through the motions, and realized the man reflected back was him, yes, but only mostly. The face looked right, but the eyes were wrong. They blinked too slowly, too evenly. The timing was too perfect. He lifted one hand, the reflection matched him, but a beat too soon. When he tilted his head, the image followed, but paused a second longer than it should have before resetting. He didn't look in the mirror after that. He tried sleeping in different places, the couch, the floor, even the porch once, but each time, he awoke in the bedroom, bed made, covers neatly pulled to his chest, as though the house was correcting his decision. Each version of the room more pristine, more aligned. The furniture grew sharper in shape. The air cleaner. Too clean. Sterile. The imperfections of the old house, cracks in the wall, rust on the door hinges, water stains on the ceiling, disappeared one by one. And yet, the more perfect it became, the less it felt like somewhere he had ever chosen to be. By the 12th day, Matthew stopped trying to sleep at all. But exhaustion always won. And the house, or whatever had taken hold of its bones, waited patiently, as though it understood fatigue better than he ever could. Each time he closed his eyes, the world reset. Not in violence, not in sound, but with a quiet authority, like a page turning without the reader's consent. And every time he woke, the walls welcomed him with a new variation. A new correction. The house had become unrecognizable in the most insidious way, not through dramatic renovation or the sudden collapse of walls, but through the gentle erosion of familiarity. Matthew no longer woke with confusion, only with quiet dread, the same way one might rise in a hospital bed and realize that all the machinery around them is humming in a language they cannot read. It had been days, or perhaps weeks. Time inside the house no longer offered numbers, only repetitions. The calendar he had once kept beside the door was gone, and with it, any external anchor. The clocks had stilled completely, their hands now fused at midnight, and no matter how long he waited, they refused to shift. The house's precision had grown uncanny. Each morning, he awoke in a space that resembled his memory only in silhouette. The furniture remained where it had last appeared, but its dimensions fluctuated ever so slightly, a chair an inch taller, a drawer half a centimeter shallower. The ceiling had begun to curve gently downward, so subtly that it was only noticeable when he tried to stand upright in the corner of the room and found that his head brushed something soft, something that receded as soon as he acknowledged it. One morning, or what he thought was morning, the bedroom was gone entirely. He woke in the kitchen, lying on the table, arms folded neatly across his chest as though placed there with care. The stove had been replaced with a narrow fireplace that never produced flame, only warmth and the faint scent of melting wax. The cabinets were all empty now. The refrigerator, still humming, held only a single item, a small, porcelain figurine of himself, exact in every detail, wearing the same shirt he had worn 2 days ago, or maybe 10. He closed the refrigerator without touching it. At some point, he began hearing sounds, not voices, not footsteps, but the repetition of his own breathing from elsewhere in the house. It would start in another room, perfectly timed, as though he had left part of himself behind, echoing softly through the structure's bones. When he held his breath, the echo continued, a few seconds longer, before catching up and falling silent. He tested it more than once, inhaling, exhaling, pausing, and always, somewhere distant but close, the rhythm mirrored his own, lagging behind by just enough to raise the question of which version was leading. There were mirrors in every room now. He didn't remember bringing them. They framed the walls at shoulder height, never large, always oval, each reflecting just enough of the room to confirm that the world behind him still existed. But their angles were wrong, the mirrors captured perspectives that didn't align with the space. In the mirror beside the staircase, he once saw the window in the kitchen, though it should have been out of frame. Another mirror showed the fireplace before he had walked into that part of the room. Once, passing the narrow hallway, he caught a glimpse of himself stepping into a doorway he hadn't approached.